Hey, my name is Justin, and today we're going to be talking about my proposal for Codex Auditable Development. This sort of came up as I just keep running into the same issue over and over and over again. And we'll talk through all the problems and what I think is a potential solution. But this is just a concept at this point. Feel free to throw at me a bunch of better and already existing ideas that solve this, but having kind of poked around, nothing really resonated with what I was wanting to see and wanting to feel when I'm working on these things. So we'll take a look at this and yeah, let me know what you think. So what is this all about? Like, what is the actual problem we're trying to solve here? So there's quite a lot. So current problems. So as an engineer, you're working on a set of problems that are typically solving a solution defined by typically a business person or a product person, or maybe even yourself. But typically, it is a clear set of things that you're trying to solve against, a set of policies or rules that you're trying to enforce. And so there's a bunch of problems with this. Is typically those rules are given to you in like a ticket, whether it's a Jira ticket or whether it is a Trello ticket or whether it's a ServiceNow ticket. You get a ticket that says do the thing. And really what that means is enforce this policy. Pretty rarely is it just like just change this thing just because it's like I'd prefer it to not be that way. Although that happens. I mean, in UI stuff that happens all the time, like this button's kind of ugly, but typically you are enforcing a policy. This is not right because of this. We want users to be logged in under these conditions. The challenge is that usually is super ambiguous and maybe it's written in some type of format, but the challenge is that is hard to kind of dig up. And so what you might do is you might get a sentence or two, maybe it's written in a if then whatever condition. All that is interesting, but it may get really confusing, especially if you have maybe dozens or hundreds of requirements that pile up over time. It's pretty easy for that to get lost. And the AI doesn't like that. And so if you're using any AI in your development, it can kind of be tricky because you're basically trying to articulate, maintain the existing set of rules, but add this one more rule to it. And so let's just say you have a button. You want to, it already has a bunch of rules around whether it should hide or show or be enabled or disabled or based on roles and these different conditions. How do you tell it that I like that, but maybe add this on top as long as it doesn't conflict? Those kind of things, it's just kind of hard to articulate that because it doesn't necessarily have access to Jira and these other systems. So you just have to sort of spell it out, but even you yourself don't know. So that can make it really tricky. AI doesn't like ambiguity. I don't like ambiguity. It can be really tricky to articulate what is the actual rule set that we're building against. Tickets are good, but they're incremental. So kind of mentioned this in passing. So the challenge is some of these tickets are coming in with, I want to, in addition to what currently exists, I want to add this one thing to it. So you think of this like a president giving an executive order, change this to this. But what if you're sitting there and the legal department thinking, well, there's 150 pre-existing things. They're making one change. How does this affect everything else? How does this impact the entire ecosystem? What if there's different conflicting rules? Which one wins? Does the latest takes precedent? Like, how does this work? And so this is useful in a diff sense, and meaning we are A and now we're B. But what if there's been 70 alphabets? How do we know where we are at any given point? You might have had that button turn on, turn off. I've had this happen where I implement something and then company says, "What? Who told you this?" It's like, I've turned this button on and off 10 times. I don't know. Just tell me what you want. Tell me what the rule is. And there's no central place to store all that. So it's confusing and you don't really have a source of truth. You just have incremental elements. Controversial rules often spread out and unauditable. Obviously, there's this sort of like, hey, this should live in an epic, or this should live in a Confluence document, or this should live here. Fair enough. I mean, that sounds great, but that's just rarely, if not ever, seen because typically this is managed by a product team who is very busy. It can be really challenging for them to realistically maintain a set of rules over time because it gets very complicated and there's no really good standards for this. So they'll typically write some things down, but it may not necessarily reflect the ground truth reality as much as it is like in abstract, here's kind of what we're shooting for. And an epic typically is written in plain language, and that's interesting, but that's not auditable, and it's really hard to maintain. And it's really hard. It's easy to nitpick at the language a little bit because it's not written in an auditable sense. So that's another thing. Another one is it's hard to test and leverage and verify nothing was broken with the new change. So I guess probably should change the language a little bit on this to make it less confusing. Um, because it's kind of often written in sort of ambiguous language, and you might say, hey, what about Birkin and what about Cucumber and all these BDD, and like it's supposed to be this certain syntax that's super unambiguous with a screenshot that is rock solid. Yes, but the problem is again, that is incremental. And if you are adding a new rule to a very large rule set, how do you know that you are not breaking an existing rule? Even the people requesting the change may not know that this is against an existing rule. And you can't push back because you'll be like, I guess they know what they're doing, but they may not. And it could be that they are kind of shooting themselves in the foot, and then you were the one who implemented them, that bad design. And so being able to actually check against what are all existing rules, and is this breaking one of the existing rules, it's really hard to tell. And if you have automated tests and those kind of things, you'd like to think it's going to catch those things. But a lot of the times those tests aren't themselves not audited against, there's not a product person or business person necessarily looking at those tests saying, hey, this is good or this is bad. Although that would be awesome, right? What if they could just write all the tests and own and manage all the tests? That'd be really cool. But I think that that's just unrealistic. I think it's just, it's been tried, and I think a lot of people aspire for that and have ideas. I've even done this where I say, hey, Mr. Product Person, can you give me sort of like integration test scripts, like if then shoulds? And that works for like a sprint, and then it's just unrealistic, not sustainable. Yeah, again, we've kind of been a dead horse at this point, but rules are complex and tree shaped. So this is like, you can just say, hey, just write up an epic. But like, what if the rules are very, very complex? If you're writing an API, then maybe you have an extremely complex set of conditions under which something will be returned. Then it's pretty hard to declare that in a way that isn't cumbersome. If it's in a Confluence doc, like, is it a table? Like, how do you format this consistently? Is it JSON? Like, how do you manage that? And there's good answers, bad answers, but something needs to be done that can satisfy a potentially very complex set of rules. Lastly, rules are often not machine accessible. So let's say it isn't Confluence. Okay, great. Like, what's my AI going to do about that? Like, do you expect me to be able to log in to that Confluence page and then like copy the page and like check against that policy? That's often unrealistic and not feasible. I just think that that's just, not impossible, definitely not impossible, but not realistic, especially if it goes all the way to do all that and then that Confluence document just hasn't been updated. Because again, if it's out of your hands, you can't have confidence that it's going to be in the format that you want it to be consistently, which is a shame, but that just is how it is. So this is kind of a candidate proposal. So let me kind of scroll over that. So here's a potential idea here. So candidate solution is, bear with me here, is just Markdown. We just have a Markdown file, and I'll show you kind of what it could look like. Again, this is not perfect. I'm haven't really sat and thought about this for days and days and days and days to say, hey, is there a better syntax? But let's just assume it's effectively a Markdown file that has some agreed upon syntax. It doesn't have to be perfect because it is meant to be read by humans and AI. It's meant to be, again, humans and AI. Therefore, it doesn't have to be necessarily in JSON or in a super duper duper highly particular format. It can be somewhat loose and play to human intuition and be framed in a way that rhymes with how you want things to be read and not necessarily super duper particular about the formatting. Because I think that's one of the things that gets people frustrated about writing things in if then should whatever format, right? Or like user stories in this very shape, is it gets really like frustrating. You're sitting to write this, you're like, how do I even articulate what I want? If instead you can just write it out in a way that feels very strict enough to achieve the goal without being so strict that you're losing momentum, to write it out. So in this particular case, this is about like, again, like roles here. So there's like a roles file that says, hey, what are the roles and what are the rules associated with those roles? And you see here, it's kind of plain language in some cases. In other cases, we spell it out a little bit more. So in this case, we define, hey, here's some categories. We got staff and on-staff. Here's some specific ones. Here's kind of the situation. Here's some maybe like a table. And here is very specific given when-thens, using like scenarios for like, hey, here's explicit scenarios. Here's how it should work. And again, notice it's not obsessive about the language. It's not obsessive about the formatting. It's clear, but it's not confusing and like controlling, I guess I should say. Meaning it's not like every word has to be in a certain place for it to work, because it's not meant to be machine readable. It's meant to be AI readable, which means that it can have things formatted in different ways, and you can use plain language and still get the goal done. And this basically just has a couple scenarios here, and common sense scenarios like, hey, what if they have multiple roles? How does this work? And this is a document you could potentially show to a normal product person, and they'd be able to make their way around this with no issue at all. They're not looking at this saying, hey, how do I make sense of this? Like, it's pretty plain language. You could pull this up on a screen. And again, this is Markdown, so really it's going to be formatted. So you would see something like this. I have super zoomed in here, but something like this. I mean, this is just it sort of formatted, right? So you do wherever you end up hosting or posting this. It could be on a web page. It could be on a whatever. You could show this to someone and they all say, yeah, that makes sense. That works. Yeah, okay, I get it. Like, this is like pretty plain language and pretty unambiguous around what can happen. If they're authenticated, they can access the app. No questions asked. There it is. And any specific scenarios. So you might say, well, okay, so what, you got a Markdown file? Like, what's the big deal? Well, a couple of really specific points, and then we'll get into like what the wins are. So a couple of specific points. Or one is, this lives in source control. This lives in code. So I kind of have here like roles / codex. So this might live in like a codices folder. Codices. And you actually have this like codex kind of syntax here, which makes it easier to find. But this is where all your rules live. Like, here is all your policies. They live here. And yeah, that way you get source control, you get all these cool things from that. But that is key, because for a lot of reasons we'll get into. Key and critical thing here. This reflects the current policy, current business rules, for better or worse. If the button has really conflicting or lousy logic, like, what a shame. Like, we need to fix that. But this is what it is. It is what it is. And we'll get into why that's a really, really big deal. The current state of the affairs, not our wish list, current state of affairs. And so if something's not right, then that policy document will reflect that issue. And again, I'll get into why that's so important. It's written in Markdown. I kind of talked about this already. It's not in JSON. It's not in a TXT file. It's in Markdown, because that's just the universal language for like, hey, here's how you read things. And also, guess what? Markdown, hey, I love Markdown. You can just literally just say, hey, enforce this policy, please. Those kind of things. It's so useful. Markdown's so intuitive. I think most people could pick it up. People already use Markdown in Jira and other things, and Trello. They're super familiar with it. And if you happen to just do it in plain language without any of the additional Markdown, you're not doing pound signs and all this stuff, hey, fair enough. It's still Markdown. It still satisfies that condition, and you're off to the races. But we'll get into why that's probably not going to be the case. You're probably not going to have somebody typing this out, but we'll get into that. Next one. Notice, obviously, this should be self-evident, no implementation details or code. I've played around with like, maybe this has like utils file like associated with it, because the utils should enforce some business logic somewhere. But I think that misses it. This is really pure policy, pure business rules. You can literally copy and paste this and email this to a product person or business person or yourself and say, hey, is this follow the rules? Like, think of this clearly. Does this make logical sense? Let's take away the specifics of the code. Like, who cares? Does this make logical sense? And you can get that answer, yes or no, without having to deal with the specific implementation details. And you could copy, like, let's say you have a really great set of rules around authentication, authorization. You could copy and paste that into all your repos and say, hey, here's our truth. Here's our source truth on authentication, authorization. And it's language agnostic. It doesn't know, it doesn't care. You can define a really killer enterprise level solution that you can all agree upon at the highest level, and then you can just paste this in and enforce it and say, hey, here is our rule on this. and then ask your AI tooling to enforce against that. You now have that. So that's super powerful. Again, I'm sort of getting to the why it's great while I'm explaining the things, but this is obviously one of those things you'd have to play around with your tooling, but AI should be unable to change these as a part of its fixes, as part of its features, enhancements. It needs to have it unable to change the policy without explicit proof removal. I mean, this is just part of like updating your prompts and all these different things to say, hey, if I am making a change that would run against this policy, explicitly ask me if I want to update the policy or not. And it could be, yeah, actually, I want to update the policy. You're right. The policy has since changed. We've since discussed that this isn't working for our users. We need to update this. Awesome. But that needs to be an explicit thing and not just like, oh, like TDD, right? You've got a test that's failing. Let me just update the test to like work now. It's like, no, this is something that really should never change without a discussion with a human, without some general back and forth to collaborate with whoever it is that's making those decisions to say, do we want to update this? Because this should, in theory, change very infrequently. Yeah, cool. So we can actually get to the good stuff. So what does this get us? So let's assume we do all these things, right? It follows all these things, lives in source control. For better or worse, it has the policy. It's written in Markdown. I mean, you can kind of see it here. It's pretty straightforward. No code specific things. It's all plain language. And it's not going to be like arbitrarily updated as is convenient. What do we get? Okay, we get all kinds of goodies here. What do we get? Yeah. Okay. This is probably one of the most important and critical wins you get here. You can like have product review this. I'll talk about it later. Maybe you can have this on a page, or maybe you just give them a GitHub link or whatever it is, right? It's just Markdown, so it'll preview nicely for them. So like, or maybe you show it in a meeting or wherever it is. If they don't like it, hey, fair enough. It's probably wrong. It's probably not good. We're probably doing something that you don't want. Make a change request via a ticket to rectify that. And we will then go and implement that feature and update the policy as a conscious decision. Or depending on your workflow, maybe you go and you literally update the policy. You type it in, hey, new policy, new rule. Or you have AI say, hey, here's our policy, update this document. And then say, hey, code, please enforce against this new policy. But that action is happening via the ticket. So the ticket is not saying, here is the new source of truth. It's now saying, here is an addendum to the policy. And so tickets, which is naturally what's happening anyway. That's what tickets are doing anyway. So whether it's just them experiencing, hey, this doesn't feel right, I think we want to change this, or whether it's them literally looking at the policy document saying, this is out of date, I want to make this update to better align with our goals, whatever it is. Clear source of truth. I mean, that's kind of self-evident. It is nice to be able to say, hey, black and white, is this good or is this right or wrong? Like, is it just clarity on, is this button doing the thing it's supposed to do? Is this endpoint returning the right data based on these set of parameters? And actually collectively deciding upon, yes, it is what it is. That is super useful because you can at least once go to a place and say, oh, okay, this is our opinion on this. Yeah, kind of talked about this earlier. Like whether you're using an agent or whether it's your tests, you might say, hey, Markdown's not really good for my automated tests. Okay, fair enough. Maybe you create some step in there that converses to something like a JSON, but I think the days of having to read JSON or YAML or an XML are gone. I think most, if not, 80% plus of testing suites are going to have some way for you to inject that interpretation step to take it from a Markdown to whatever format it needs. And some actually will do that, or are already doing that under the hood, meaning you give it a JSON, it's going to convert it to a Markdown, which or whatever, right? There's already these steps. I think if you just look ahead around the corner, like that's inevitable. I would rather err on the side of making these really, really easy for the policy makers and the developers and ask more of our systems, which I think is fair to say. If it's a Markdown, it's a Markdown. Where I'm zooming around to the wrong spot here. Let me zoom out a little bit. Okay, I'm Here we go. I got to zoom out further. So easily convertible readable UIs, I mean, I think you name it, pretty much every system out there, whether it's a UI framework or whatever, or even if you just want to look at the code, Markdown is about as good as you can get. If you're literally in the code base, you can just literally convert it to Markdown. You can read it in Markdown, it's easy. Or many frameworks just allow you to directly interpret Markdown as HTML. Like, it's just so easy, so common, so frequent, so intuitive. I think it's one of those easy wins. Something like JSON is like, I think most people can kind of make their way around it. You have nested requirements, and like, I do think there's some interesting things there. But again, if it makes it one step too hard for people to radically and enthusiastically adopt, then it won't be adopted. So I think Markdown's a great fit for those reasons too. So this is, I guess, it's a challenge. I'm trying to pick my favorite feature, but I think this has got to be up there, which is, this is not contingent upon the product team, the business people, or you when you put your business hat on, you're the business person for the day. For you to just sit there and like think through all of the different if-else conditions. It's not contingent upon them to write a massive Confluence document with all of the logic. That's just that's unrealistic. Like, too much has been done. And even if you say, hey, we're about to start a project, can you write this all out? It's just unfathomable. It's just too complex. And so many things are implicit and intuitive right there on the spot. But if you were to actually declare everything up ahead of time, these documents would be unrealistically long and unmanageable. If instead you say, hey, here is what is already the case. Here is already the current state of affairs. Good, bad, or ugly. It is what it is. Then you can basically have AI or whatever you're tooling look at your existing code base and create these codices for you. And so this immediately takes the pressure off of them and say, you can come to them and say, hey, I've already generated 100% coverage, policy detailed of every single thing within our application. Here is the 17 codices that reflect all of the business decisions that we make. Want to review them? And they'll, of course, be like, oh yeah, I mean, this is, if they don't want to say yes to that, then, you know, they may be in the wrong job. But this is their opportunity to review that and see, hey, does our current system align with what we expected it to? And if it doesn't, that's an awesome opportunity for them to submit a ticket and say, hey, I want to make a change to this request because for whatever reason, the policy is out of line. Fair enough. No big deal. They can put in that ticket, we'll update the policy, and then enforce against that policy. But what's great about this is you're not reliant on them to go do all this initial work and then for them to do it in a certain syntax. You come to them already with a syntax that they can read and understand that is defining the policy that has accumulated over time, and then let them then work against a pre-existing thing. It's so much easier, it's more intuitive, and you're not coming to them asking them to write more stuff for you. Instead, they can continue to write tickets in whatever format they want, but you will use that to update the policy that lives in your code base because you are now the owner of at least the documentation of their policy. Okay, next. Source controlled. I mean, that's already pretty good right there. You'll be able to track, and again, whether you're using automated system or using a script or whatever, you can actually go back and say, hey, when did this policy change? Like, that's great. What are you gonna do that in Jira? Like, good luck. That's gonna be, if you can do it, it won't be machinable, like machine readable. It's going to be like some poor human's going to have to suffer through finding that out. Whereas if it's in source control, you can literally write up a bash script that says, tell me when this was updated, like, and actually get intel on that. That is super duper powerful and effectively represents our current understanding of the policy as of this date. That's really powerful. Let's zoom down. There's no way that was it. Oh, that was it? Oh my goodness, I thought there was more. So one thing I'll kind of end on is I think you got to think of this as like, you know, the Romans, what was it, like early, you know, very early in the empire, they basically had these well-known rules and laws, but they were kind of like in people's heads, and like, and it wasn't until you went to court that you realized, oh, the actual specific law is this, because it wasn't necessarily written down. It wasn't until like 550 BC or something that they actually wrote down, here is all the laws, and here's all the rules. And you're, oh, okay, that's the specific rule. And I think that's sort of us, where there is already these well-known rules of how the tool or platform or API or whatever it is that you're working on already works. For better or worse, here's the current state of affairs. And it's just a matter of us writing down here's what it currently is. And then it's now gives us a medium that we can negotiate with, we can talk over, we can debate over. It can be updated, it can be corrected. You can develop your own system for how do we update the policy, those kind of things. But this is at least a mechanism to hopefully provide some sanity to what is currently really chaotic. So anyway, that's it for me. Hopefully this was interesting. Hopefully it's useful. If you're interested, feel free to message me. I can give you a prompt that basically generates one of these for your entire project. It's like super basic. I mean, this is not crazy stuff, but it'll actually go and look up all the business rules that you have defined, and it'll basically create you a folder of codices, which is super interesting to at least see what it looks like. Maybe you've never really thought through what is all the specific rules, but once you actually see it all written out, it is super interesting, super valuable, and obviously intuitive how you can leverage this in the future. So hopefully it's useful, and we'll talk next time.